It was a bright Monday morning. The sun was out, the air was cool, and people were busy walking near the Federal Building in the city center. Most were in a rush. Some were sipping coffee, others were typing on phones. No one noticed the man in the gray suit. He walked slowly, calmly. His shoes were clean, his shoulders straight, his eyes focused. In his hand was a small black folder. His name was Derek Miles. He looked no different from any other working man. But to some people, he looked out of place. Two police officers stood near the building's steps. One of them, Officer Grant, watched Derek closely. The second officer, Officer Miller, squinted and whispered, "You see that guy?" Grant nodded. "Yeah, something feels off." Miller stepped forward. "Let's talk to him." Derek was just about to walk up the steps when he heard someone call out, "Sir, stop right there." He turned around. Both officers were walking toward him, hands on their belts, serious faces. Derek sighed quietly. This wasn't the first time. "Yes, officers?" he said, polite and calm. Grant looked him up and down. "Can we ask what you're doing near the Federal Building?" Derek blinked. "I'm heading to work." Miller raised an eyebrow. "This building?" "Yes." "What department?" Derek smiled slightly. "I think that's something I can explain once I'm inside." But the officers didn't like that answer. Grant stepped closer. "We're not playing games. Show ID. Tell us who you are." A few people on the sidewalk stopped to watch. A mother pulled her child closer. A man took out his phone and began recording. Derek noticed. He knew how fast things could go wrong. He took a slow breath. "Officers," he said, "I don't think this is the right way to handle this." Miller's voice got sharper. "And who are you to tell us how to do our job?" The tension grew. Derek didn't reach for his folder. He didn't argue. He just looked them in the eyes and said one word, a word that stopped both officers cold. Word that made Miller's jaw tighten and Grant's eyes widen. That word was judge. For a moment, the street went quiet. Even the people watching stopped moving. The two officers stared at him, confused. Grant laughed awkwardly. "Judge what?" Derek stepped forward, calm as ever. "Judge Miles, I begin today. First floor, courtroom 3B. He reached into his folder slowly and pulled out his official federal badge. Miller's face turned pale. Grant stepped back, blinking. People around them gasped. The man recording whispered, "No way!" The officers stared at the badge. It was real. Derek Miles was the newest federal judge in the district, and they had just stopped him like he was a threat. Officer Miller looked down, embarrassed, silent. Officer Grant cleared his throat. We're sorry, sir. We didn't recognize—" Derek cut him off gently. "I know, that's the problem." His voice was soft but full of meaning. Then he turned, walked up the stairs, and entered the building without another word. The two officers stood frozen, ashamed. Behind them, people murmured. Some smiled. Some looked angry. But everyone was thinking the same thing. They judged him before he said a word, and that one word, judge, changed everything. Long before anyone called him Judge Miles, he was just Derek, a quiet boy. A smart boy, growing up in a small, run-down neighborhood on the south side of the city. His mother, Miss Loretta, raised him alone. She worked 2 jobs, one at a diner, one cleaning offices at night. Every evening she came home tired, hands rough, feet swollen. But she always smiled at Derek. "You're my hope, baby," she'd whisper, kissing his forehead. "You're gonna be somebody." Derek didn't have much. His clothes were hand-me-downs. His backpack had a broken zipper. But inside that bag, he carried something special. Books. He loved reading. Stories, history, law books from the library. Anything with words, he read it. He'd sit on the front steps and read out loud to the neighborhood kids. One day, a man from the block asked, "You gonna be a preacher?" Derek laughed and shook his head. "No, sir. I want to be a lawyer. Maybe even a judge." The man smiled. "Big dreams. Don't forget us when you make it." But not everyone was kind. At school, some teachers looked right past him. "You're smart, but don't aim too high," one said. "They don't give robes to kids like you." He never forgot those words. They didn't make him angry. They made him focused. One evening, Derek came home early and found his mom sitting on the couch, crying. She held a letter in her hand. He rushed over. "Mom, what's wrong?" She smiled through her tears and handed it to him. It was from Civic Law Academy, one of the top pre-law programs in the state. "You got in," she said, hugging him tightly. "My baby got in." That night, they sat at the tiny kitchen table. She pulled out a jar, old, dusty, hidden in the back of the pantry. Inside were coins, folded bills, a gold ring, and a little chain with a tiny cross. She looked at him with proud eyes. "I've been saving since you were 5. "But Mom," he whispered, "this is everything you have." She placed the jar in front of him. "This ain't mine anymore. It's yours. You go, learn, change the world." At Civic Law Academy, Derek felt out of place. Most students had fancy laptops, rich parents, and expensive clothes. He had a second-hand suit and a cheap notebook. Some laughed at him, others ignored him. But one professor noticed. Professor Janet. Rowe, tough, fair, and respected. She gave Derek a chance to speak in class when others wouldn't. She read his essays, gave him extra cases to study. "You don't talk much," she once said, "but your words have power." Derek worked harder than anyone. He read late at night, took jobs in the library to pay bills. Sometimes he slept in the law school basement between shifts, but he never complained. Every time he wanted to give up, he remembered his mom's hands, her tired eyes, her dreams. He had to make it, not just for himself, but for her, and for every kid who looked like him. In his final year, Derek was chosen to argue a mock trial case in front of visiting judges. He wore his best shirt, fixed, the button with a safety pin. He stood, nervous, hands shaking slightly, but when he spoke, the whole room went quiet. Every word hit like thunder, clear, strong, full of truth. When he finished, one judge stood and clapped. The others followed. Afterward, Professor Rowe pulled him aside. "Have you ever thought about becoming a judge?" "Derek?" He smiled. "I think about it every day." Months later, on graduation day, Miss Loretta sat in the front row. Her son walked across the stage, head held high. When he received his law degree, the crowd cheered, but Miss Loretta just closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, God. My baby made it." Outside, as cameras flashed and friends hugged him, Derek looked up at the tall buildings downtown. He didn't just see glass and concrete. He saw walls that needed breaking, doors that needed opening, and minds that needed changing. That night, he sat alone and wrote one word on a sticky note. He stuck it on his bedroom mirror. Judge. Not for ego, not for power, but for justice. Derek Miles was now a lawyer, not just in title, but in heart, in soul, and in mission. He passed the bar exam on his first try. Miss Loretta cried so much she couldn't even say a word. She just hugged him and smiled. That same day, Derek packed a small suitcase and moved to the city. A bigger city, a tougher world. He was ready, or so he thought. Derek joined a small law firm, Lennox and Gray. It wasn't fancy. The office lights flickered. The carpet was old. But they did something important. They fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Single moms. Evicted families, young boys in trouble with the law. These were Derek's people. He knew their pain. He understood their fears, but the courtroom was no friendly place. On his first case, Derek stood in court wearing his best suit. He spoke, clearly, presented his facts, gave everything he had. But the judge barely looked at him. The opposing lawyer, a wealthy man with silver hair, smirked and said, "Nice try, rookie. Maybe stick to small claims." Derek lost that case. It hurt, not because he failed, but because his client lost hope. Many days Derek walked out of court feeling invisible. He'd ride the train home, tie loosened, head low, but then he'd call his mother, and every time she'd say the same words. "Baby, you're planting seeds. Don't stop watering them." Weeks turned into months. Derek studied harder, spoke stronger, and won small victories. He helped a wrongly evicted woman keep her home. He fought for a teenage boy caught with the wrong crowd. He stood in front of judges who doubted him and earned their respect. Slowly, courtroom by courtroom, he became a force. But it wasn't just the law that tested him. It was the looks, the whispers, the quiet disrespect. Some security guards stopped him at the courthouse entrance. One called him intern. Another once asked, "Whose assistant are you?" He smiled politely. "I'm the attorney. Would you like to see my bar card?" Inside, he burned, but he never let it show. Because Derek knew his calm was stronger than their doubt. One night, he stayed late at the office. The halls were quiet. The city lights blinked outside the window. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out the sticky note from years ago. Judge. He stared at it. Was he really meant for that path? Could a boy from his neighborhood really sit on that bench? He didn't know, but he believed, and belief was stronger than fear. The next morning, he walked into the office and made a choice. He applied to the federal clerkship program. It was hard to get in. Thousands applied. Only a few were chosen. But weeks later, his phone rang. A soft voice on the other side said, "Mr. Miles, congratulations. You've been selected." Derek dropped the phone. His hands shook. He picked it up and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you so much." At the federal building, he worked beside top judges. He read case files, wrote legal opinions, The phone call came on a rainy afternoon. Derek was at his small apartment, sipping cold coffee and reading court papers. His phone buzzed, a number he didn't know. He answered softly, "Hello?" The voice on the other end was firm and clear. "Mr. Derek Miles, this is the Department of Justice. We're pleased to inform you, you have been selected for federal judicial appointment." Derek stood frozen. The words echoed in his mind. "You have been selected." He sat down slowly, the phone still at his ear. He had worked so hard. He had waited so long. Now it was real. 2 months later, Derek returned to his hometown. But this time, not as a poor kid or a struggling lawyer. This time he came back as Judge Miles. The federal building downtown was the same. The streets were the same. But he had changed. People began to whisper, "Is that really him? That's the Miles boy, right?" He made it? Miss Loretta was the proudest of all. She stood on the courthouse steps the day he was sworn in, wearing her best dress. When his name was called and the room clapped, she didn't cry. She just looked up, whispered, "Thank you," and smiled. News spread fast. Articles were written. Southside kid becomes youngest federal judge in state. Interviews were requested. Derek gave only one. He sat on a local channel and said, "I didn't become a judge to wear the robe. I became a judge to make sure justice wears no blindfold." But not everyone was happy. Some older lawyers muttered, "Too young." Some judges said, "Too inexperienced." One said quietly, "Is he really ready?" Derek heard it all. He didn't reply. He let his work speak for him. His first day on the job was calm, until it wasn't. Outside the building, the morning crowd moved like always. Coffee, phones, papers, footsteps. Derek arrived early, wearing a gray suit and carrying a simple black folder. He walked up the steps slowly. Then it happened. Two police. Officers near the door watched him closely. One whispered to the other, "That guy looks suspicious." "Yeah," the other replied. "Let's talk to him." They stepped forward. "Sir, stop right there." Derek turned, just like he had so many times before. His eyes were calm, his voice polite. "Yes, officers?" They asked him questions. Why he was there, what he was doing, where he was going. Derek answered, but not in full. He waited for them to judge him with their eyes, waited for the crowd to gather, waited for the moment. Then softly, he said one word, "Judge." They froze. Mouths opened. Eyes blinked. People nearby stopped to watch. And when Derek pulled out his federal ID badge, silence, then whispers, then gasps. Officer Miller took a step back. Officer Grant blinked. We're sorry, sir." Derek didn't smile, didn't shout. He just nodded and said, "You judged before I spoke. That's why justice must speak for those who can't." Then he walked past them, up the steps and into the building. Inside, the courtroom. The room filled quickly. People from all over came to see the new judge. Lawyers, journalists, old teachers, even childhood neighbors. They all watched as Derek put on the robe. Black, smooth, heavy with meaning. He stood behind the bench, took a breath and spoke. "Court is now in session." But this story wasn't just about a man becoming a judge. It was about how every step, every struggle, every no led to this moment. Derek wasn't just a judge, he was proof. Proof that where you come from doesn't limit where you can go. Judge. Derek Miles sat alone in his new chambers. The room was quiet, with polished wood, law books on tall shelves, and a large window that overlooked the city. He should have felt proud. But inside he felt something else. Pressure. His first real case as a federal judge was waiting, and it wasn't a small one. A folder sat on his desk. He opened it slowly. Case. State versus James Carter. Charge. Armed robbery, resisting arrest. Defendant. 19-year-old male, African-American plea. Not guilty. Derek stared at the photo clipped to the file. The young man looked familiar. He had dreadlocks, soft eyes, and a tired face. Suddenly, it hit Derek. James Carter lived 2 blocks from where he grew up. That night, Derek couldn't sleep. He thought about the boy. Was he guilty? Was he just in the wrong place, at the wrong time? He had to be fair. That's what a judge does. But how do you stay fair when the person in front of you reminds you of yourself? The next day, the courtroom filled early. On one side sat the prosecutor, sharp and loud. On the other sat a public defender who looked overworked and exhausted. In the middle sat James. His eyes scanned the room, nervous. When Judge Miles entered, James stared hard at him, almost as if he couldn't believe it. The trial began. The prosecutor showed photos. Presented evidence. Talked fast. He had a gun. He ran from police. Case closed. The defense lawyer stood up, spoke softly. "Your Honor, my client was scared. The weapon was never fired. He's never been arrested before." The judge nodded. But inside, his heart was heavy. Derek listened to every word. He watched James closely. Every time the boy looked down, Derek saw himself years ago, quiet, judged, dismissed. But he couldn't let emotions lead him. He had to follow the law. Still, he needed the truth. He asked the defense lawyer, "Was there a witness?" The lawyer hesitated. "Yes, Your Honor, but..." She was scared to testify. Derek leaned forward. "Bring her in. Everyone deserves to be heard." The next day, a young girl entered the courtroom. She was 14, nervous, clutching her mother's hand. She said one thing that changed everything. James didn't rob the store. He was trying to stop the man who did. The court went silent. Even the prosecutor blinked in surprise. The truth had been hiding in fear. Now it was in the open. Later that afternoon, Judge Miles made his ruling. He spoke slowly, clearly. James Carter, you are found not guilty of robbery. You acted in panic, not with violence. You are not innocent of mistakes, but you are also not a criminal. The boy's mother burst into tears. James stood frozen, then whispered, "Thank you, Your Honor." After court, as the room emptied, James stayed behind. He walked up to the judge's bench. "I didn't think judges looked like you," he said quietly. Judge Miles smiled. "They usually don't," he said, "but we're changing that one case at a time." That evening, Derek walked out of the courthouse. The sky was turning orange. He breathed in deep. His first case was over. But his journey had only begun. He knew more cases would come, harder ones, bigger ones. But now he was ready because he understood the power of listening, the power of truth, and the power of one chance. The next morning, the city woke up to a surprise. Newspapers, websites, and social media were filled with one name: Judge Derek Miles. Some called him a hero. Some called him too soft. And some asked a very loud question. Did he let a criminal walk free? The headline on one popular news site read, "Young Judge Sparks Controversy in First Big Case." The article showed a photo of Derek in his black robe. Below it, angry comments. "He only freed that kid because they're the same race. We need judges who protect us, not play social justice games. He's too young, too emotional." Derek sat at his desk reading each line. He didn't speak. He didn't argue, but inside he felt it, a storm of pressure. Was he wrong? Had he missed something? Then he remembered the girl's voice in court. He didn't rob the store. He was trying to stop the man who did. And just like that, he knew. He did the right thing. Later that day, his assistant walked in. "Sir, there's a crowd outside the building." Derek looked out the window. A group of people had gathered. Some were holding signs that said, "Justice has a new face." "Thank you, Judge Miles. We believe in fairness." He smiled for the first time that day, but it wasn't all support. Later that week, Derek got a letter. It was from the Judicial Review Board. A complaint had been filed against him, not for breaking the law, but for making a decision that caused public distrust. It felt like a punch to the stomach. That night he called Miss Loretta. She listened quietly, then said, "Baby, when you shine, some folks get blinded, but don't dim your light for people who never wanted to see you anyway." He laughed softly. Miss Loretta always knew what to say. Still, the pressure grew. Every news channel seemed to be talking about him. One reporter said, "This new judge is clearly emotional. The courtroom is no place for sympathy." Another shouted, "He's setting a dangerous example, letting people off easy." But something else began to happen. Other voices rose. A woman who'd been unfairly jailed spoke on live TV. "That judge? He gave my son hope." A retired officer said, "He followed the facts. That's what real justice looks like." Even one of the older judges who once doubted him said quietly, "I may not agree with every ruling, but the boy's got spine." At court the next week, Derek walked in as usual. But the building felt different. Some officers nodded at him. Some lawyers avoided his eyes. But one little girl in the hallway smiled and said to her mom, "Mommy, he's the judge with the brave heart." Derek stopped and knelt beside her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Jada," she said. "Well, Jada, you have a brave heart too." She giggled. Later that evening, Derek returned to his chambers. He pulled out a folder marked, "Upcoming Case. People versus Langston Corporation." It was about a large company polluting water in a poor neighborhood. Big case, big company, big pressure. Derek looked at the file, then out the window. The city lights were glowing, and somewhere in the distance a siren sang. He whispered to himself, "I'm not here for the easy cases. I'm here for the hard ones." Then he opened the file and started reading. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the back rows, lawyers whispered to each other, security stood tall near the doors. Everyone was waiting, because this wasn't just any case. This was Langston Corporation versus the people. A powerful company had been dumping waste into a poor neighborhood's water supply. Kids got sick, families moved away. Some even died, but for years, no one listened, until one judge said, "I'll hear the case." That judge was Derek Miles. The company brought its best lawyers. Expensive suits, smooth voices, fake smiles. They walked into the courtroom like they already won. "We'll crush this," one whispered. But when they saw the judge, young, black, calm, they paused. One even said, "This won't take long." They were wrong. Over 5 long days, people came to speak. A mother whose baby was born sick, an old man who lost his land, a little girl with bandages on her arms. Each voice was a drop of truth. Together, they became a flood. But the company fought back. They said, "No proof." They blamed old pipes, bad plumbing, anything else. They even tried to question the people's character. Derek listened to every word. His face never changed, but inside, he was on fire. On the final day, the company's top lawyer stood up. Tall, confident, cold. He looked right at Judge Miles. "Your Honor," he said, "with all due respect, do you really understand cases like this?" The room went quiet. Everyone knew what he meant. Not about the law, but about who Derek was. Derek looked at the man, slowly removed his glasses. Then, calmly, he spoke. "I understand what it means to have dirty water. I understand what it means to be ignored. I understand what it means to walk into a room and be doubted. Because of your skin, your clothes, your background." He leaned forward. "And I understand justice. That's why I'm here. Not to protect the powerful, but to give the unheard a voice." The courtroom was silent. Not even a paper moved. Later that evening, Derek sat alone with his final judgment. He looked at the law. He looked at the facts. He looked at his heart. And he wrote, one word, "Guilty." The next morning, the judgment was read aloud. Langston Corporation was fined millions. They were ordered to clean the water, pay for damages, and publicly apologize. People outside cheered. Inside, some cried. That same day, Derek walked out of the courthouse. The same 2 officers from months ago saw him. This time they nodded. One said, "Good work, sir." Derek smiled. As he reached his car, a young man called out, "Judge Miles!" He turned. It was James Carter, the boy from his first case. Clean clothes, holding books, smiling. "I'm starting law school next week," James said. "Because of you." Derek walked over and shook his hand. "No," he said. "Because of you." That night, Derek visited Miss Loretta. She made tea, turned off the TV. "You're tired," she said softly. "Yes," Derek replied. "But I'm not stopping." She nodded, then whispered, "You remember that day they stopped you outside the courthouse?" He smiled. "I remember." "And what did you say that froze them?" Derek looked up. His voice was calm, strong. "I said one word, judge." She smiled wide. That one word changed everything. And she was right. That one word, judge, had power. But not because of the robe, not because of the courtroom. It had power because it came from a man who never gave up, a man who turned pain into purpose, a man who listened, believed, and stood up, even when the world didn't.